The United States is home to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. Think about that.
I think we've all heard the quote that the first step to solving a problem is recognizing that we have one. In this past quote by former President Barack Obama, he shares that while we have 5% of the global population in the United States, we have 25% of the world's incarcerated population. That is wild, and that is a problem. First, we're going to learn a little bit about the history. How did it become this way? Next, we're going to talk about some key terms that are important when having these conversations. And finally, we're going to talk about what can we do now that we know that this is definitely a problem. So let's start with the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, stated that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction, except as a punishment of crime. That is the underlying clause that I want to draw attention to, because after the Civil War, Black Americans could be accused for crimes, be arrested, and then forced to work off their punishment, in a sense. And they could be arrested for petty crimes, like vagrancy or loitering, and then again, now they're forced to work off their arrest. So in a sense, slavery disguised as a punishment. So we often look at the 13th Amendment as this big defining moment in US history, which it was. But I think that clause shines a little light on how, even though slavery was abolished, people were able to get away with things that disproportionately impacted Black Americans. So I want to fast forward a little bit to the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was happening, and coincidentally, crime was also increasing. So it was easy for people to look at this and draw a parallel and say, hey, the crime is increasing because of the Civil Rights Movement. But what's interesting is that when the Civil Rights Movement was happening, the baby boomer generation was becoming adults. So just demographically, there were more adults, which by nature would cause more crime. So that is one instance where people were able to connect things that weren't inherently necessarily correlated. There just happened to be more adults at the time. I want to shed light on the 1970s because this is when this idea of criminalization really started to take off. So it started with this idea of a war on crime and a war on drugs. Drugs becoming criminalized is what really started putting people in jail. Instead of being treated like something that's an addiction or a health problem, it became a crime to have a drug offense or to be possessing drugs. And what's really interesting here is that there were two drugs, crack and cocaine, that were treated very differently. Crack was created as a cheaper version of cocaine, yet the punishments for crack were far harsher. And what's interesting is crack was more widely used amongst communities of color because it was dealt in inner cities, while cocaine was more of this boujee, upper class drug. Now you get a system that doesn't treat drug offenses the same, and when more communities of color are using crack, they're going to jail disproportionately higher. So the good news is that in 2010, former President Barack Obama passed a law with the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 doing away with the 5-year mandatory minimum for possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine and increasing the amount of crack required to result in a mandatory sentencing for federal drug trafficking crimes. I wanted to insert this chart here just to show how before it was 5 grams of crack and 500 grams of powdered cocaine that could get you the same sentence, and it only increased to 28 grams. So it's still not completely a 1-to-1 ratio. And that's highlighted here on the American Civil Liberties Union website, which talks about how while it was a good first step, it will really only be fair when the offenses are treated as 1-to-1. Hello, this is me literally with the video on YouTube as a draft. I haven't posted it because I'm inserting this in my video where I am because I didn't realize how hard it would be to post something like this because I don't want to share anything that's wrong or that would be falsely interpreted in terms of the facts. I don't usually make videos like this. See, this is part of the new process where I have to really rely on facts that I don't know. I've learned these things, but I don't okay, what am I trying to say? I'm really stressed about getting everything right. I guess one thing that I'm being nitpicky about is that in my, when I'm talking about crack and cocaine, I talk about it disproportionately impacting communities of color. Well, I wanted to insert this specifically here, which talks about how, according to the commission, 79% of those sentenced for crack offenders in 2009 were black versus 10% who were white and 10% who were Hispanic. And cocaine was far less skewed. 17% were white, 28% were black, and 53% were Hispanic. So I just kind of wanted to share that discrepancy. Trying my best to deliver you guys the right facts and figures. Okay, now back to the video. I'm sorry, I'm back. Can I just say that I know that fact is like from 2010 and we're literally a decade later. So also, I hope you take everything I say with a historical context. I understand now that crack and cocaine might be a lot more, like the communities that use it are more diverse, but just historically, harsher punishments on crack in the beginning is what disproportionately caused a lot of Black Americans to be incarcerated. So it's important to recognize right off the bat that historically there were crimes that targeted people of color more, which can account to the demographics in our jails and prisons today. The next thing I wanted to touch upon is how being tough on crime became such a political thing. It was a political thing that leaders had to fight to say that they were more tough on crime. This idea of creating a safe world, the US elections were really based on invoking fear that which president is going to be the toughest on crime. And this eventually caused former President Bill Clinton to pass a $30 billion crime bill, which really increased the amount of policing. And I wanted to share this clip from 13th on Netflix, which you all really need to watch, of former President Bill Clinton addressing that.
Because I signed a bill that made the problem worse. And I want to admit it. There were longer sentences. And most of these people are in prison under state law, but the federal law set a trend. And that was overdone. We were wrong about that.
So now I want to talk about two terms, cash bail and plea bargains. Cash bail is the idea that if you are convicted of a crime and you're arrested, you will be sent to jail unless you can pay bail. And the purpose of paying bail is to ensure that you show up for your trial, so that once you show up for your trial, you get your money back. But the problem is that depending on your bail amount, poorer people in society won't be able to pay that. For example, if you have a bail posted of $10,000 and you can't pay that, then you have to go to jail. So we have a system that gives people with more money more rights. So now I want to share the story of Khalif Browder. Khalif was arrested under the crime of stealing a backpack, and he was offered a plea bargain, which means that he could plead guilty and then get a lesser sentence for pleading guilty. But he didn't want to take the plea bargain because he wanted to fight for his innocence. So what ended up happening is his family couldn't pay the cash bail. So he was sent to Rikers Island jail complex awaiting his trial for nearly 3 years. And eventually he was let free, all charges were let go, and a few years later he committed suicide. We need to think about what jail and prison does to a person. We need to ask ourselves who should be involved in this conversation outside of lawmakers, politicians, and corporate America. We need psychologists involved in this. We need social workers involved in this. We need people who genuinely want a society that works for everyone, thinking about jail and prison reform and how we can make this better. Because like I stated in the beginning of the video, talking about it, we understand there's a problem. We should not have 25% of the world's incarcerated population. We should not. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is how the prison-making business is a business. There are companies that profit off of people being in jail. The company that provides food in prisons. The company that provides the telephone service between prisoners calling their families. There are people who profit off of other people being in jail and prison. And that's important to recognize because similarly, slavery was an economic thing. And whenever money and business is involved, people will fight hard to keep it the way it is, which is why we need to talk about it, which is why we need to bring it to light and say that no, this is not okay. So before I talk about what we can do next, I wanted to talk about what happens after some of these people convicted get out of jail. Once you're marked as a felon, a lot of your rights in this country are stripped away from you. Sometimes you won't be able to vote, you won't be able to get a job, you won't be able to get a loan, and we need to think about how conducive that is. They've served their time as we have granted them, yet they can't be a functioning member of society. What's important to note is states actually have different laws. In some states, you can vote even when you're a felon. In some states, or for some jobs, they don't ask you right away if you have for your criminal record, and they ask for it at different times in the hiring process. So now I kind of want to transition into what we can do. Now that we know that there are a bunch of problems, I think the first thing we can do is talk about changing laws. Former President Barack Obama did it in 2010, and we can do it again. We can look at laws, we can look at sentencing, and we can change them. I also think that we can talk about alternatives to prisons and jails. We can talk about drug offenses, and if we should spend money towards rehab instead of paying for this prison industry. I just want to end with saying that when we're born into the world, we are born into a country with a certain set of laws and practices, but that is not the law of the land. We are allowed to challenge it. It was just 5 years ago that gay marriage was legalized in the United States. People had to fight for that. So we can fight to change laws. We can recognize problems and change laws. We have the power to do that, and I believe in our power. I don't have all the answers, but I believe in talking about it. I believe in you. I believe in your creative mind. Whatever you got from this video, whatever injustices you believe exist, think about them and think about what we can do, because it will only take creative people who care about a society that doesn't incarcerate so many of its members for us to see change. I'm going to link a bunch of resources in my bio, and I hope that you continue to read, watch videos, and learn about mass incarceration so that we can continue this discussion. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, whether you learned something new, or if you have anything else you want to share. I hope to see you next Sunday for the episode on police and why people want to defund the police. And yeah, so thank you for your time and space.